"Easy, cowboy, you'll break my back," cried the Apache woman as he treated her. The storm outside rattled the wooden beams of the old cabin, the desert wind howling as though it carried the voices of restless spirits. Inside, shadows danced across rough-hewn logs, the light of a single lantern casting a golden hue over the cowboy and the Apache woman pressed against the splintered timber. She clung to the beam, breath ragged, her dark hair falling wild over her shoulders, sweat and dust glistening on her skin. His calloused hand steadied her, but his grip was firm, unyielding, as though he was torn between protecting her and holding her prisoner. "Easy, cowboy, you'll break my back," she cried, her voice a blend of defiance and pain. Her words struck him, though his expression was unreadable beneath the brim of his worn hat. His pale blue eyes burned with something deeper than lust or anger. It was desperation, raw and dangerous. The war between his people and hers had carved scars that ran far beyond flesh, yet here they were, bound not by peace but by survival. The Apache woman's wrists bore the marks of rope, yet she was no fragile captive. She twisted against his hold, her muscles coiled like a panther ready to strike. He knew if he gave her even an inch, she'd break free and sink a blade between his ribs. And still, he didn't let go. "I ain't here to break you," he muttered, voice hoarse, heavy with dust and exhaustion. "But if you keep fighting me, I can't promise I won't." Her lips curled into a snarl, but her eyes betrayed something else, uncertainty. He had tracked her for days across dry canyons and rattlesnake valleys, following the faint signs only a hunter would notice. A broken branch, a bent reed, the faint trace of bare feet in the sand. He found her wounded, blood seeping from a gunshot wound across her side, and instead of killing her as his orders demanded, he carried her here. But kindness in the Wild West was never simple. "Why?" she spat, glaring at him. "Why save me? Your kind kills mine. I should be dead at your boots." He tightened his jaw, torn between the truth and the lie. "Maybe I've had my fill of killing. Maybe I don't see you as just Apache." His hand lingered against her shoulder, where the leather fringe of her clothing clung to sun-darkened skin. "Or maybe, I'm a damn fool." She shifted, testing his grip again, and this time he let her move. She turned on him, fierce eyes flashing, her body close enough that he felt the heat radiating from her. He didn't flinch. She raised her hand as if to strike him, but hesitated. Something in his gaze, steady, almost sorrowful, stilled her. The cabin groaned in the storm, dust falling from the rafters. For a moment, silence reigned between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken histories. She lowered her hand slowly, her breath mingling with his. "You carry ghosts," she said, her voice softer now, almost reluctant. "I see them in your eyes." His throat tightened. Images flickered through his mind. Men he had gunned down, women he had watched weep over bodies, a young Apache boy who had looked at him with hatred as the cavalry set fire to their village. He had pulled the trigger then, but the boy's eyes never left him. They haunted him still. The woman studied him, her anger tempered by curiosity, though her body remained taut, ready. "You fear me," she whispered. "But not because I can kill you." He swallowed hard. "No, I fear you because you see me." Her heart jolted at his words, though she hid it beneath her scowl. She wanted to hate him, to lash out, but his confession cracked something inside her. The world outside this cabin was built on blood, her people's blood, her family's blood. And yet here stood a man who should have been her enemy. Looking at her not as prey, not as a savage, but as a woman. Still, mistrust ran deep. She turned away from him, gripping the timber beam again, her shoulders trembling though she refused to show weakness. He moved closer, his hand brushing her arm, steadying her as if she might fall. "Don't," she hissed, though her voice lacked its earlier venom. "Then let me help," he said quietly. "Your wound's still bad. You'll tear it open if you keep struggling." She froze, caught between pride and necessity. Finally, with a low growl, she allowed him to shift her so she leaned against the beam more comfortably. He pulled a strip of cloth from his satchel, pressing it to her side. She hissed through her teeth, nails digging into the wood, every nerve in her body screaming both resistance and reluctant surrender. His face was close now, shadow and lantern light etching the lines of hardship across his skin. The smell of sweat, leather, and gunpowder clung to him, but beneath it lingered something else, a strange, unexplainable gentleness. He bound her wound carefully, his rough fingers surprisingly delicate as they brushed against her. "You saved me," she said finally, her voice low. "But don't mistake that for trust." "I wouldn't dare," he replied, meeting her gaze. Their eyes locked, the air thick with tension neither could name. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, another storm brewed, one of fire, fear, and something dangerously close to longing. She pulled away from him slightly, though the warmth of his touch lingered like an unwelcome brand. "You think saving me makes us even? You think it erases what your people have done?" His jaw clenched, pain flickering across his eyes. "No, nothing could erase that. Not for you, not for me. But maybe we can stop adding to it." Her lips parted, words caught in her throat. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. The cowboy tipped his hat back, studying her in silence. He wanted to reach for her again, not to restrain, but to reassure. Yet he knew better. She was fire, untamed, unpredictable, and if he touched her wrong, she'd burn him alive. Still, he stayed close. Still, she didn't push him away. The storm outside began to fade, the first calm settling over the desert night. But inside that cabin, between two sworn enemies bound by blood and fate, the storm was only beginning. The storm's lull brought an eerie quiet, the kind that magnified every sound inside the cabin. The Apache woman's breathing was shallow, still caught between defiance and exhaustion, while the cowboy shifted back slightly, keeping his distance now though his eyes never left her. He leaned on his knees, sweat trickling down his temple, mixing with dust and grime. The silence pressed on both of them like a weight, and for a while neither dared to break it. Outside, the faint call of a coyote cut through the night, its cry lonely, almost mournful, and it seemed to echo the ache both carried inside. She finally moved first, adjusting her position against the beam and pulling her hair back from her face. Her hands, bound earlier, were raw with rope marks, and when she rubbed her wrists, she winced but said nothing. The cowboy watched her with a wary caution, as though expecting her to spring at him any second. She noticed this, and a bitter smile touched her lips. "You don't sleep with snakes in your boots, cowboy," she said softly, her voice low but sharp as flint. "Yet here you are, keeping one in your cabin." He tilted his head, studying her. "You think yourself a snake. I think myself what your kind has always called me. Savage, cunning, dangerous." Her dark eyes held his, unblinking, almost daring him to contradict her. He sighed, pulling off his hat and tossing it onto the nearby table, where the lantern's glow outlined its battered edges. "If I thought you were just dangerous, I'd have left you out there to bleed in the dirt. Hell, I wouldn't even have bothered pulling the bullet out." She turned away, hiding the flicker of confusion his words brought. Part of her wanted to believe him, another part screamed not to. Trusting a man like him meant opening a wound far deeper than the one on her side. She clenched her jaw and let the silence return. The cowboy finally stood, stretching his back with a groan. He moved to the small shelf on the far wall, rummaging through a tin for jerky and dried beans. He poured some into a pot, added water from a jug, and set it over the small fire burning in the hearth. The smell soon filled the cabin, earthy and plain, the food of a man used to hard living. The woman's stomach tightened with hunger despite herself, though she masked it with a cold stare when he looked back at her. He noticed the flicker in her eyes anyway. "You'll eat," he said simply. "Don't matter if you hate me or not. A body can't fight on an empty belly." "I don't take food from enemies," she snapped, though her throat burned with thirst and her muscles trembled with fatigue. He ladled some broth into a tin cup and set it on the table within her reach. "Suit yourself. But the desert won't care what we are to each other. If it don't kill you, hunger will." For a long time, she resisted. But when he turned away to tend the fire, she reached for the cup, her hands trembling as she brought it to her lips. The broth was thin but hot, and it filled her with a warmth she hadn't realized she craved. She drank quickly, finishing before he looked back. He didn't comment, though a faint glimmer of amusement touched his face. Instead, he stirred the pot and sat down heavily on a stool, leaning his elbows on his knees. "You got a name?" he asked after a while. She narrowed her eyes. "What good is a name to a man like you?" He shrugged. "Names mean we ain't ghosts. Names mean something when the dust settles." She studied him, weighing the sincerity in his voice. Finally, she said, "Naya." He nodded, repeating it under his breath, as if committing it to memory. "Naya," he said again, this time louder. "I'm Colt." She let the name hang in the air, tasting it silently. Colt. It fit him. Sharp, dangerous, but dependable in the hands of the right man. She turned away before the thought settled too deeply. Hours passed, the fire burning low, the storm outside reduced to a whisper of wind brushing against the cabin walls. Naya shifted to lie on the rough bedroll he had spread for her, though sleep was slow to come. Colt dozed in his chair, one hand resting near his holster, the instinct of a man who trusted no one, not even himself. When dawn broke, light spilled into the cracks of the cabin, painting the air gold. Naya stirred, her body sore, her side aching from the wound. She pushed herself up, her eyes darting toward Colt. He was awake, watching her with the same steady gaze as before. "You'll be strong enough to ride in a few days," he said. "But the land between here and your people is treacherous. Cavalry patrols, bounty hunters, worse." She frowned. "And you, what will you do when I'm gone? Hunt another like me?" His jaw tightened. "No, I'm done hunting. I've had enough blood on my hands." She didn't believe him, not entirely. But something in his voice carried the weight of truth. She studied him, seeing the scars on his knuckles, the weathered lines on his face, the heaviness in his shoulders. This was a man who had lived too long with ghosts. 2 days later, Naya's strength began to return. She moved with more ease, though pain still flickered across her face when she stretched too far. Colt kept his word, giving her food, water, and even his spare blanket against the chill of the nights. He never touched her unless to change the bandage on her wound, and even then his hands were careful, almost reverent. Despite herself, she began to see him differently. He was still the enemy, still the man whose people had brought ruin to hers. But he was also the man who sat awake through the night to keep watch, who offered her food before eating himself, who listened when she spoke. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the desert hills, Naya asked, "Why did you really save me?" Colt looked at her for a long time, then sighed. "Because once, long ago, a woman saved me. She didn't have to. She had every reason to let me die. But she didn't. I owed her, and maybe Savin, you was the only way to pay that debt." "Who was she?" Naya pressed. His eyes darkened. "A woman I loved. She died because of me." Silence fell, heavier than before. Naya didn't ask more, though curiosity gnawed at her. She saw the pain in his eyes, and for reasons she didn't understand, she let it rest. That night, sleep came fitful for both of them. Naya dreamed of fire, her village burning, her people screaming. She woke with a gasp, her chest heaving, sweat beading her skin. Colt was beside her instantly, his hand on her shoulder. "Easy, Naya," he murmured. "You're safe." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she didn't pull away from his touch. Instead, she leaned into it, if only for a moment, drawing strength from the steadiness she found there. Days turned into a week. Naya grew stronger, her body healing, though her spirit remained guarded. Colt repaired his gear, tended his horse, and always kept a wary eye on the horizon. Danger lurked in every shadow, he knew it, and so did she. One morning, while she fetched water from the nearby creek, a rifle cracked through the air. The bullet missed her by inches, splintering a tree trunk. She dove for cover, heart pounding, and Colt's voice roared from the cabin. "Naya!" He burst from the door, revolver in hand, firing at the ridge where the shot had come. 2 figures ducked back, cavalry scouts by the look of their uniforms. Naya scrambled toward him, and together they ran for the cabin as more shots rang out. Inside, Colt shoved the door closed, barring it with a heavy beam. "They've found us," he growled. Naya's eyes flashed with fury. "Your people. They ain't my people no more," Colt snapped. "But they'll kill us both just the same." The next hour was chaos. Bullets tore through the cabin walls, splinters flying. Colt returned fire, his revolver barking thunder, while Naya used a bow he hadn't realized she carried, her arrows swift and deadly. The two fought side by side, enemies once, allies now. When the gunfire finally ceased, silence fell again. 2 cavalrymen lay dead outside, the others fled. Naya stood panting, her bow still clutched in her hand, her hair wild around her face. Colt lowered his gun, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on her. "You fight like hell," he said, almost in awe. She met his gaze, fierce and unyielding. "I fight to live, that is all." But something had changed between them. In the heat of battle, the line that divided them blurred. They were no longer Apache and Cowboy, enemy and foe. They were survivors. That night, as the fire crackled low, Naya sat across from Colt, her eyes softer than before. "Maybe you are not like the others," she said quietly. "And maybe you ain't the savage they told me you were," he replied. The air between them grew charged again, the same storm that had brewed that first night in the cabin. Their eyes held, neither willing to look away, and for a moment the world outside, the war, the hatred, the ghosts, faded. Naya leaned forward slightly, her breath catching, her heart pounding. Colt did the same, his rough exterior cracking to reveal the man beneath. Their lips met, tentative at first, then deeper, fiercer, as though both had been holding back too long. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Naya whispered, "Easy, Cowboy, you'll break my back." He chuckled softly, though his eyes burned with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "Then I'll hold you gentler than I've ever held anything in my life." For the first time, Naya allowed herself to believe it. The night stretched on, long and full of unspoken promises. Though danger loomed, though the world outside would never forgive them, inside that cabin they found something neither had expected, something worth fighting for. The fire burned low, sending faint shadows crawling across the cabin walls as Naya lay wrapped in the blanket Colt had given her mind restless despite the exhaustion pressing down on her body. The kiss they had shared lingered between them, charged with both danger and tenderness, a forbidden spark in a world that had only ever shown them blood and loss. She had expected to feel shame or anger after giving into it, but instead she felt unsettled in another way, as though something long locked away inside her had been stirred awake. Colt sat near the fire, his revolver resting on his knee, his gaze fixed on the door but his mind clearly elsewhere. He didn't speak, didn't move, just sat with the stillness of a man who had weathered storms far worse than the desert outside. But his heart wasn't still. He could still feel the warmth of her lips, the weight of her breath, and the way she had whispered those words that cut deeper than any knife. Naya finally broke the silence, her voice soft, almost uncertain. "Why do you look at me as if I'm not your enemy?" Colt glanced over, the lantern glow catching the weariness in his eyes. "Because I've lived long enough to know an enemy ain't always the one wearing the face you've been told to hate." She held his gaze, her dark eyes unreadable. "My people have been hunted, burned, scattered. I watched my father die with a bullet in his chest, away in chains. You expect me to forget all that because you spared me?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I don't expect you to forget. Hell, I can't forget my own ghosts. But maybe what we do now matters more than what we did before." The words settled heavy in the air. Naya turned her face toward the shadows, thinking of her father's strong hands, the songs her mother sang by firelight, the children who once played freely in the canyons. All gone, yet here she was, alive, her fate tangled with a man she should have killed. She wondered if her ancestors were watching, if they cursed her or pitied her for the choices she had made. Colt rose to his feet and walked to the window, peering out into the dark desert. His shoulders were tense, his hand close to his weapon. "They'll come again," he muttered. "Scouts don't give up easy. Word's out there's an Apache woman and a deserter holed up in these hills. That's enough to bring half the damn territory down on us." Naya sat up, clutching the blanket around her. "Then why stay? Why risk it?" He turned, his eyes fierce. "Because if I leave you now, you're dead before you see another sunrise. And I ain't letting that happen." Her chest tightened at his words, though she told herself it was anger. She had survived this long by never depending on anyone, by fighting with tooth and claw against every hand raised against her. And yet this man spoke as though her life meant something more than just survival. The next days blurred into a rhythm of tense silence and wary companionship. Colt repaired the cabin's weak spots, gathering logs and reinforcing the door. Naya hunted small game, her bow swift and sure, bringing back rabbits and quail for their meager meals. At night they sat together in uneasy quiet, sometimes speaking, sometimes letting the crackle of the fire be their only conversation. The storm between them never truly died, but it shifted, deepened, until it became something neither of them wanted to name. One evening, while the sun bled red across the horizon, Naya asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "If we leave this place, where will you go?" Colt looked out toward the desert, his jaw set. "South, maybe, into Mexico. Or west, where the mountains are high enough to swallow a man whole. Somewhere they ain't looking for me. And me." His eyes softened. "Wherever you want to go. I ain't your master. You choose." The simplicity of his answer caught her off guard. She had expected chains, commands, or betrayal. Instead he offered her freedom, something she hadn't known since before the soldiers came. It made her distrust him all the more, because freedom was the rarest lie men told. The choice came sooner than either expected. At dawn 2 days later, the thunder of hoofs shook the ground. Colt was already awake, pulling her to her feet as the cabin rattled with the sound of riders. "Cavalry," he growled. "Too many to fight." Naya grabbed her bow, her eyes fierce. "Then we don't fight, we run." They burst from the back of the cabin, Colt's horse already saddled. He swung into the saddle and pulled her up behind him, her arms gripping his waist as the animal surged forward. The desert wind tore at their faces as they rode hard across the barren land, bullets whistling past them. The riders shouted behind, their rifles cracking, but Colt's horse was swift, pounding over rocks and sand like a beast born for escape. They didn't stop until the sun was high and the sounds of pursuit had faded. The horse lathered with sweat, its sides heaving, Colt slowed to a trot and finally stopped near a rocky canyon. They dismounted, both gasping for breath, their bodies pressed with the adrenaline of survival. Naya leaned against a boulder, her chest rising and falling, her eyes blazing with both fury and exhilaration. "You led them to us," she accused. Colt shook his head. "No, they were already hunted. We just happened to be where they were looking." She studied him, her mistrust fighting with the memory of how tightly she had clung to him, how his body had shielded hers as they fled. "You saved me again," she admitted reluctantly. "I reckon I'll keep doing that until you stop needin' saving," he replied, and though his tone was light, there was a weight beneath it, something unspoken. They moved deeper into the canyon, finding shelter beneath an overhang of stone. Colt built a small fire while Naya fetched water from a trickling spring. They ate little that night, both too weary to care about hunger, but when they lay down, their bodies brushed in the small space, and neither pulled away. Sleep came, but not for long. Naya woke in the dark, Colt's arm draped protectively over her. For a moment she lay still, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the warmth of him against her. It was dangerous, she knew. To feel this way, to want what could never last. But the desert had stripped her of everything, and here in the hollow of stone, she let herself take what little comfort she could. The days turned into weeks as they moved west, always hunted, always watching the horizon. Sometimes they spoke of their pasts, snatches of memory, never full truths. Naya told him of the songs her mother sang, of the taste of roasted corn, of the dances around the fire before war stole it all away. Colt told her of the ranch he once dreamed of the brothers he buried, of the mistake that turned him from soldier to fugitive. In those moments, they were just a man and a woman, not enemies, not prey and hunter. But the world did not forget. One night, as they camped in a narrow canyon, shadows moved above them. Before Colt could draw, a net dropped, tangling him to the ground. Naya cried out, loosing an arrow, but rough hands seized her, dragging her back. Torches flared, and she saw them, not cavalry, but bounty hunters, hard-faced men with greed in their eyes. Well, their leader sneered, looking down at Colt. The deserter and the savage. Worth a pretty penny, the both of you. Dead or alive. Colt struggled against the net, fury in his eyes. Leave her out of this. She ain't worth your trouble. But Naya spat in the leader's face, her voice like fire. I am worth more than any coin you'll ever touch. They laughed, binding her wrists and hauling her to her feet. Colt fought, but the weight of men on him was too much. They tied him too, dragging both captives through the canyon to their camp. That night, under the watch of armed men, Colt and Naya sat back to back, their hands bound, their bodies bruised. You should have left me in the desert, Naya whispered bitterly. And let them take you. Colt shot back. Not a chance. Her heart twisted at the ferocity in his voice. Even in chains, even beaten, he refused to abandon her. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his back against hers remind her that she wasn't alone. But she knew this was not the end. If they wanted to live, they would have to fight harder than ever before. The desert was merciless, but so were they. The night grew colder, the fire of their captors burning low. The hunters grew careless, drinking, laughing, underestimating the will of the ones they held. And in the silence between them, Colt whispered, "When I give the word, we run." Naya smiled faintly, the fire of defiance returning to her. "I was born running, cowboy. Just make sure you can keep up." The firelight flickered against the bounty hunters' faces, rough shadows twisting their features into masks of greed and cruelty. Colt sat with his back pressed to Naya's, feeling the tension in her muscles, the rise and fall of her breath, and the steady defiance that had become her shield. The ropes cut deep into his wrists, but his mind was sharp, scanning every detail of the camp. He counted 6 men, 4 drunk and loud, 2 keeping a half-hearted watch. Their horses were tied to a line not far from the fire, stamping at the sand, restless in the cool desert night. The hunters laughed, boasting about the reward money, and Colt knew they'd already decided how they'd spend it before the sun rose. He glanced at Naya, her face calm, her eyes burning like coals in the darkness. She caught his look and gave the faintest nod, as if to say she understood. There would be no waiting for mercy. Mercy had no place in the desert. Colt shifted his wrists, feeling for slack in the knots. The rope bit into his skin, but every small movement loosened a fiber. He leaned his head slightly, whispering so low only Naya could hear. "Be ready. When I move, you run." Her lips barely parted. "I won't run without you." He almost cursed at her stubbornness but bit it back. Her loyalty was dangerous, reckless, but in that moment it ignited something inside him stronger than fear. The men drank deeper, one of them staggering to his feet and stumbling toward the horses. Another collapsed into the sand, laughing until he passed out cold. Colt's chance was coming. He twisted again, pain flaring in his wrists as the rope dug tighter, then suddenly loosened. He exhaled silently. The knot slipped enough for him to force his hand free. Naya felt his body shift, and she tensed, ready to spring. Colt waited, timing his breath with the flicker of the fire and the hunters' drunken shouts. When one of the guards turned to pour himself another swig of whiskey, Colt lunged. He slammed his shoulder into the man nearest him, sending both of them sprawling into the fire. Flames leapt high, sparks exploding as the man screamed, clutching at burning clothes. Chaos erupted. Naya rolled clear, twisting her bound wrists against the rocks until the rope frayed and snapped. She seized a glowing branch from the fire and swung it, embers showering into another man's eyes. He shrieked, blinded, dropping his rifle. Colt was already on his feet, fists pounding into the stunned guard's jaw before ripping the man's revolver free. Gunfire cracked in the night, shouts echoing through the canyon as the hunters scrambled for their weapons. Naya dove low, snatching the fallen rifle and firing a shot that dropped one man where he stood. Colt spun, firing into the dark, the flash of his gun lighting his face like lightning. The fight was brutal, close, and filled with dust and fire. Men screamed, horses reared, and the smell of blood mixed with gunpowder. Naya moved like the wind, her hair flying, her bow reclaimed from where the hunters had tossed it, arrows hissing death into the night. Colt fought with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose, each shot deliberate, each strike fatal. When silence finally returned, the camp was strewn with bodies. Only the crackle of dying flames and the distant howl of a coyote broke the stillness. Colt dropped his empty revolver, chest heaving, his shirt torn and bloody. Naya stood over the last of their enemies, her arrow buried in his heart, her face fierce but unreadable. They looked at each other across the wreckage, their eyes speaking louder than words. Together they untied the horses, gathering what supplies they could from the dead. Colt found bullets, food, a map. Naya found a knife and slid it into her belt. Without a word, they mounted the strongest of the hunters' horses and rode hard into the desert night. The moon was high, silver light washing over endless dunes and rock spires. They didn't slow until dawn, when exhaustion forced them to stop near a dry riverbed. Both slid from the saddle, stumbling from fatigue. Colt sank against a rock, his head falling into his hands, while Naya knelt nearby, her body trembling. "You're hurt," she said, pointing to the gash along his side. "It'll heal," he muttered, though the blood soaking his shirt said otherwise. Naya tore a strip from her clothing and pressed it to the wound, ignoring his protests. "You saved me back there," she whispered. He looked at her, his eyes shadowed. "And you saved me. Guess that makes us even." But even as he said it, they both knew it wasn't true. There was no balance in what bound them now. It was deeper, heavier, something neither could name without fear of breaking it. They rested through the heat of the day, taking turns watching the horizon. Naya dozed briefly, waking with a start when Colt brushed her hair back from her face. His hand lingered for a moment, and she didn't push it away. In the silence of the desert, surrounded by danger on every side, they found a fragile peace. By evening, they rode again, following the map Colt had taken. It marked a trail west, toward the mountains where he hoped they could vanish. The land grew harsher with every mile, jagged rocks, deep ravines, and sun so fierce it burned their skin. Water was scarce, food scarcer, yet they pressed on. On the third night, as they camped beneath a twisted juniper tree, Colt spoke quietly, his voice raw. "I never thought I'd live this long. Every day I figured was borrowed. But riding with you, it feels like maybe I'm meant for more than dying in the dirt." Naya's heart clenched. "And what am I meant for, cowboy? To forget my people, to run until there's no land left?" He didn't answer right away, staring into the fire as if it held the truth. Finally, he said, "Maybe you're meant to live. And maybe I'm meant to make sure you do." She wanted to argue, to remind him that she didn't need his protection, that she was no fragile thing. But instead, she found herself reaching for his hand. He took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining, rough and calloused, bound by more than circumstance. The following days blurred into one another, a constant struggle against the land and the hunters who never seemed far behind. Twice they spotted riders in the distance, and twice they doubled back, covering their tracks through canyons and dry riverbeds. Colt grew weaker from his wound, though he hid it behind grit and stubbornness. Naya noticed, though, and her anger burned at the thought of losing him after all they had survived. One night, when his fever burned high, she laid him down beneath a rocky ledge and pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. He tried to wave her off, mumbling about moving on, but she silenced him with a look. "You saved me more times than I can count," she said. "Now let me save you." His eyes softened, and for once he didn't argue. He drifted into uneasy sleep, and she kept watch, bow in hand, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. When morning came, his fever had broken. He woke to find her asleep beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. For the first time in years, he smiled without bitterness. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, whispering her name like a prayer. They moved slower after that, but the mountains grew nearer, their peaks rising like giants against the horizon. Hope stirred between them, fragile but real. Yet with hope came fear, for they both knew the desert was merciless, and the past was never far behind. On the final stretch, as they rode through a narrow pass, gunfire exploded from above. Rocks shattered, the horse reared, and they were thrown to the ground. Dust choked the air as figures descended, more bounty hunters, hardened and hungry for blood. Colt rolled to his feet, drawing his revolver, but his bullets were few. Naya loosed arrows, swift and deadly, each shot finding its mark. But the hunters kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. Colt fought with everything he had, fists and fury when his gun ran dry. Naya moved like lightning, her knife flashing in the fire of battle. Yet the enemy pressed them hard, driving them back against the canyon wall. Colt took a blow to the ribs, dropping to one knee, blood spilling from his mouth. Naya cried out, fighting her way to him, her heart twisting with terror. She reached him, dragging him to his feet, her body straining with every ounce of strength she had left. Together they fought, back to back, their movements desperate but unyielding. The hunters circled, jeering, certain of their victory. Colt staggered, his vision blurring, but he tightened his grip on Naya's hand. "If we fall," he whispered, "we fall together." She turned her face to him, her eyes fierce and filled with something deeper than rage. "No, cowboy, we live together, or not at all. With a cry that shook the canyon, she surged forward, dragging him with her, cutting a path through the hunters with sheer will. Arrows flew, blades flashed, and Colt found strength in her fury, striking down those who dared come close. The fight became a storm, savage and relentless, until the hunters broke, scattering into the night. When silence fell again, the ground was littered with the fallen. Colt collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving, his blood soaking the sand. Naya dropped beside him, cradling his face in her hands. "You stubborn fool," she whispered, tears mixing with dust on her cheeks. "You can't leave me now." He looked at her, his lips trembling with a faint smile. "Easy, Naya, you'll break my back." She laughed through her tears, pressing her forehead to his. "Then I'll carry you the rest of the way." And as the stars blazed above, endless and eternal, they held each other in the heart of the desert, bound by fire, blood, and something greater than either had ever dared to dream. The desert night clung to them, heavy with dust and silence, broken only by the rasp of Colt's breathing and the trembling sobs Naya fought to contain. She held him against her, his weight dragging her down, but she refused to let go. The stars above seemed cruel in their brightness, uncaring of the blood spilled on the canyon floor. Colt shifted faintly, his hand brushing her cheek, and she caught it, pressing it to her face as though she could will his strength back into him. He was pale, his lips cracked, and his eyes half-lidded, but he managed a smile that tore through her heart. "We're not done yet," he whispered, his voice rough as gravel. Her throat tightened, and she shook her head. "No, we're not. We've come too far. You're not allowed to die. Not now, not ever." He chuckled weakly, a sound that sent fresh fear through her. "Never thought anyone'd care if I lived or died. Guess I was wrong." "Damn right you were wrong," she said fiercely, cradling him close. "You don't get to leave me in this cursed desert." They rested for only as long as his strength demanded, then with her arm around him and his will dragging him onward, they moved again. Step by agonizing step, they pressed through the canyon pass, Colt leaning heavily against her, Naya's slender body carrying more than it should have been able to. But the fire in her spirit refused to let him fall. By dawn, the mountains loomed larger than ever, their jagged teeth cutting into the sky. Snow gleamed on the highest peaks, a promise of water, shelter, and perhaps freedom. Yet between them and salvation stretched miles of barren land, stalked by enemies who would not stop. The bounty on Colt's head was enough to draw men from every corner of the frontier, and Naya knew the night's battle had only delayed the inevitable. They found a shallow cave in the rocks as the sun rose, its shadow deep enough to hide them. Colt collapsed against the stone, his body shaking with fever. Naya tore what remained of her clothing into strips and bound his wounds tighter, whispering words of her people, prayers to the spirits that watched over the land. She pressed her lips to his brow, her tears falling freely now that his eyes were closed. She had promised herself never to show weakness, but Colt had carved through her defenses like no blade ever could. When he stirred again, his gaze met hers, clouded but warm. "Naya," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "if I don't make it." She silenced him with a hand over his lips. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." "I need to," he insisted, though his strength was fading. "If I fall, you have to keep going. Promise me you'll live." Her jaw clenched. "I won't live without you. Don't ask me to." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of wind through the rocks. Finally, Colt sighed. "Then I'll just have to hold on. For you." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, their lips tasting of blood and salt and all the battles they had fought. It was not a gentle kiss, but a vow, a tether between souls bound by fire and loss. When she pulled back, her eyes blazed with new determination. "We'll make it. Both of us." The next days tested that vow. They moved only at night, hiding in the caves and shadows by day, for the hunters were relentless. Twice they spotted riders scouring the plains, torches glowing like fireflies in the distance. Once, a bullet ricocheted off the rock near Naya's head, forcing them deeper into the mountains. Colt's wound slowed him, but his will was iron. He refused to let her carry all the weight, even when every step tore at his flesh. They hunted what little game they could, shared mouthfuls of melted snow for water, and slept in each other's arms, finding strength in their closeness. In those quiet hours, Colt told her pieces of his past he had never spoken aloud. of the war that had scarred him, of the family he had lost, of the crimes he had committed to survive. She listened without judgment, her hand tracing the lines of his face, her silence a balm to wounds deeper than bullets. In return, she told him of her people, of the dances and songs that once filled the desert nights, of the laughter of children now silenced by greed and violence. Together, they built a world of words and memories, a fragile refuge against the harshness of the land. Yet fate was not done testing them. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon in crimson streaks, they heard the thunder of hoofs. Naya pulled Colt into the shadows of a boulder, her breath catching as a column of riders appeared on the trail below. There were more than a dozen, armed and grim, their eyes scanning the rocks. At their head rode a man with a scar across his jaw and eyes as cold as steel. Colt stiffened beside her. "Grady," he whispered, his voice like venom. Naya's gaze snapped to him. "You know him. He used to ride with me," Colt said, his fists clenching. "Back before I broke away. He's worse than any devil. If he's here, it means they'll never stop." The riders passed, but Naya saw the way Grady's eyes swept the cliffs, sharp and knowing. He was hunting not just for gold but for vengeance, and he would not rest until he had Colt's head. She gripped Colt's hand tightly, her heart pounding. The storm was coming. That night, they climbed higher into the mountains, the air growing colder, thinner. Snow crunched beneath their boots, their breath fogging in the chill. Colt's strength waned, but he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant death. Naya supported him, her body aching, but her spirit unyielding. By the third day in the mountains, they reached a valley where a river cut through the snowfields, its waters pure and cold. Pure and cold. Pines lined the slopes, their branches heavy with frost, and for the first time, hope flared bright. Here, perhaps, they could find safety. Here, perhaps, they could begin again. But as they descended into the valley, gunfire shattered the silence. Bullets tore into the snow at their feet, splintering the trees. Naya screamed for Colt to run, dragging him behind a fallen log as riders burst from the tree line. Grady's men had found them. The battle that followed was unlike any before. Colt, weak but unbroken, fired with deadly precision, each shot fueled by rage and love. Naya moved like the spirit of the wind, her arrows striking true, her knife flashing in the chaos. But the hunters were many, and their trap was tight. Grady rode forward, his scar twisting as he grinned. Well, Colt," he called over the gunfire. "Didn't think you'd crawl this far. And look at you, bleeding, broken, clinging to a squaw like she's your savior." Pathetic. Naya's eyes burned, but Colt laid a hand on her arm, steadying her. He rose slowly from behind the log, his revolver steady despite his wounds. "Grady," he said, his voice low and deadly, "I should have put you in the ground years ago." Grady laughed, the sound echoing off the cliffs. "And you think you'll manage it now, half dead as you are?" "No, Colt, this is where it ends. I'll take your head, and the girl, and leave your bones for the crows." Something in Colt snapped then, a fire that had lain dormant roaring to life. He stepped forward, defying the bullets that whistled past, his eyes locked on Grady's. "You'll take nothing," he growled. "Not her, not me, not today." The duel was sudden, violent, and final. Colt's revolver barked once, twice, and Grady staggered, shock etched across his face as blood bloomed on his chest. He fell from his horse, the snow drinking his life. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the ragged breaths of the living. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining hunters faltered. Naya seized the moment, loosing arrow after arrow until the survivors turned and fled into the trees, their courage shattered. The valley grew still once more, the snow stained red with battle. Colt swayed, his revolver slipping from his grasp. Naya caught him as he fell, lowering him gently to the ground. His blood spread across the snow, stark and terrible. She pressed her hands to his wounds, desperate, her tears falling freely. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Please, Colt, we made it this far. Don't leave me now." His hand rose weakly, brushing her cheek. "Naya," he whispered, his eyes dim but filled with love. "You were the one good thing I ever found. If I go now, I go at peace." "No," she sobbed, pressing her forehead to his. "You live, damn you. You promised me we'd live together." A faint smile curved his lips. Then I'll keep my promise. I'll fight, as long as you're with me. And against all odds, he did. Days passed, his strength flickering like a candle in the wind, but Naya refused to let him slip away. She hunted, gathered herbs, tended his wounds with the care of one who loved beyond measure. Slowly, miraculously, his body began to heal. The fever broke, the bleeding slowed, and color returned to his face. When at last he stood again, leaning on her shoulder but standing nonetheless, they looked out over the valley together. The river sang, the mountains stood tall, and the air smelled of pine and snow. It was a land untouched by greed, a land where they could be free. Colt took her hand, rough and scarred, and pressed it to his heart. This place, he said softly, it could be ours. A home, a life worth living. Naya's eyes shone with tears, but they were not of sorrow. Then we'll make it so. Together. And so they did. In the shadow of the mountains, by the river that never ceased to flow, they built a life. It was not easy. Nothing worth having ever was, but it was theirs. They hunted, fished, planted, and watched the seasons turn. They laughed by the fire, whispered their dreams beneath the stars, and in time, their love grew roots as deep as the pines around them. The world beyond still raged with greed and violence, but in that hidden valley, Colt and Naya found peace. He, the outlaw who had run from death his whole life, and she, the warrior who had lost everything but hope, together forged a new beginning. And when the wind swept through the trees and the river sang, it carried their story across the land, not as legend, but as truth. That even in the harshest desert, even in the darkest canyon, love could bloom, fierce and unyielding, a fire that no storm could extinguish. They had fought, bled, and nearly broken, but in the end, they had won not just survival but something greater, a life worth living, together until the last breath. And when their time finally came, years later, they went not as fugitives or hunted souls, but as lovers whose spirits would ride forever through the mountains they had made their home. Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your support means more than words can ever say. If you felt the depth of this journey, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing powerful stories to life, and your presence here makes all the difference.